Elijah, welcome to the mother of all talk shows, Extra. I want to ask you something as one European to another. They keep saying that, well, this is different. These are not Africans, Arabs, Asians that are being bombed. These are civilized tribes from Europe that are being bombed, and therefore all norms of refugee hatred and repel all borders have to be dropped. In fact, in Britain, you're being given a very substantial amount of money, if you gross it up over the year, to take in a Ukrainian. Not something that was ever done for Syrian refugees or Afghan refugees, or even for homeless British servicemen living on the streets. But I wonder if these people are so young or so foolish that they don't remember Yugoslavia.
Hello, George, and I'm really honored to be on your show. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
I think the world has a very short memory, and the difference is what kind of war we are facing today. Apart from the discrimination that is disgraceful, but the war that we have seen throughout the last 2 decades, it's a war that the West has triggered. We have done this war. We went to Afghanistan, we went to Iraq, we went to Syria, and we have created this havoc to the point that people are so much uninformed that when they talk to me, they say, well, is it the problem that people in the Middle East don't want democracy? Is it a problem that in Yugoslavia, Europe is incapable of sorting out its own problem? So the misinformation and the disinformation that is horrendous, particularly in the war in Ukraine today, is turning people to swallow everything, including journalists who are saying, well, we're dealing with white people with blue eyes. They forget that they have exactly the same blood color, and they are facing even worse. We faced even worse crisis around the world, and we're still facing it in Yemen. We're still facing it in Syria. The bombing in Yemen has been going on for the last 7 years, and there are 20 million people who are starving, 12 million children. Look at the United Nations figures. They are really scary. And people talk about Ukraine because it is not our war. It is the war between the US and Russia. It is the war that US is pushing everybody in Europe behind it, or pushing it ahead of it, and saying, well, we need to fight the evil Russian, and you don't need to mention that the problem is our control, our hegemony, and that we have been trying to create this problem in Ukraine since 1997, and then we increased it in 2004 with the Orange Revolution in 2014. And then we have this war today. People don't know that the Ukrainian army was 120,000 only in 2014. And between 2014 to 2021, the Ukrainian economy was on the floor, yet the army increased to 350,000 men. The economy, the budget to the army was 1%. Today, it's 7%. Hundreds of millions of dollars are sent to Ukraine today, not in form of humanitarian aid, but in form of weapons to go and kill themselves and to go and fight Russia with one objective, is to make sure that this war is going to last as long as possible.
That was quite brilliantly expressed and educated me, and I thought I knew it all. I didn't know these Ukrainian army figures or the budget increase from 1% to 7%. That's quite stunning, actually, at a time when actually Ukraine's main export is its own people. The economy depends on the remittances of millions of Ukrainians who've had to leave their country because of the dire economic situation. Ukraine in the Soviet times was a very successful economy. All kinds of industries were developed in that period, now all lost, closed. The only industrial capacity Ukraine has now is in the east of the country, in the ethnically Russian areas. Now, I think, gone forever from Ukraine. So millions of Ukrainians are living abroad because there's no work for them, while all this money is being spent on an army and all this tax is being raised for an army. And it's quite clear what its purpose is. This is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. The United States doesn't have the guts to fight Russia itself. Otherwise, it would already be in there. But it wants to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. But here's the point, Elijah. In this proxy war, the Europeans are going to be the big losers. Why has the European political class and the public gone so quiescently into this good night?
Well, that's a very good question, George. First of all, we think we are independent, we have independency, and we think we have a democracy. Domestically, yes, we do have that. Internationally, we don't, because the Montreux Agreement in 1823 gives the right for the Americans to impose on Europe a policy that is not incompatible with the interests of the United States. And if we look at what's happening in the last only few weeks, the number of US soldiers has increased from 70,000 to 100,000. We have dozens of US military bases in Europe. What for? Why do we need in Europe nuclear weapons? Well, the answer is very obvious. We need to be in Europe the avant-garde of the Americans, so the Americans can bomb Russia in case of nuclear war, so the bombs fall rapidly on Russia if they are sent from the European continent and not from the United States. So that doesn't allow Russia to respond in case of nuclear war. So the whole objective is focused from the American side on how we are going to behave in case of nuclear war with Russia, and not how we're going to build the economy in the world and allow everybody to live comfortably or not under poverty level. Therefore, what we see in Europe, we see an increase of number of US troops, we see an increase of number of nuclear bombs, and we see the hostility that is the American pushing the Europeans ahead of them and asking the European to invest their budget, not domestically, but to support the armament of Ukraine. And everybody is saying it is only a question of time that Russia end this war in Ukraine and impose its conditions. So basically what we are doing today is saying exactly what you just said. We want more Ukrainian killed just to be able to continue our media campaign around the world to say how bad are the Russians. It is exactly the same scenario, and I would like to quote it here. The president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, who was asked to hold on for 6 months and to fight the Taliban because it was trained by the Americans for this purpose, which means the Americans wanted the president of Afghanistan to kill more Afghani for 6 months and after that decapitulate. This is exactly what they are asking from President Zelensky today, to receive more weapons that the Americans have been training Ukrainian to use since 2014, 2015 for this exact day, so they can hold a few extra months before they surrender. So if we know the result, why are we having more refugees? Why are we sending hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons? Why are we asking the Ukrainians to kill themselves? And why we are missing up on the entire economy of the planet? We pay additional prices on food, on transport, on everything. And we also see population like Ukrainian suffering the cause of war again in Europe.
Again, a brilliant exposition. I had some hopes that Germany might resist, not least because of its history, but also because of its geography, because of its economic dependence on Russian energy, and because of the market which Russia represents for German industry, particularly at the luxury end, German cars and so on. And maybe if Mrs. Merkel had still been in, that would have happened. But the Social Democrats and the Greens, true to form, true to 1914, have quickly capitulated to the empire. And therefore, I have some hope only in France. What can you tell me about the state of French public opinion in a presidential election year?
Well, I'm going to go very quickly to Germany, and then I will move to France. Germany, if the world needs to know, your audience needs to know, that the suspension of the gas line from Russia to Europe through Germany, that is called Nord Stream 2, that had never been inaugurated, but was ready to pump gas, it was suspended by an announcement of President Joe Biden from Washington. Yes. This is not a European will to do what they think is the best for their own European population. And what France did in 1966, General de Gaulle, he asked all the Americans to leave and closed all the US NATO bases in France. Now, the president, Emmanuel Macron, tried to do that in 2018 when he said France needs a European army to defend itself, including from the United States, because he saw what how President Donald Trump tried to bully Europe and to blackmail the European states. And in 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, President Macron said exactly the same thing. Now, the Americans responded by increasing the number of US troops in Europe and saying, you have NATO. Why do you need a European army? Why do you need to defend yourself against the United States? And what the Americans did is they rallied everybody in the world behind them, with them against Russia. So nobody dares to say, well, the problem is because you Americans in 1990, you promised the Russians that you will not expand NATO by a document that you, the US National Security Archive, released. James Baker told President Gorbachev that he's not going to, the US will not expand NATO beyond the Soviet Union. Warren Christopher, United States Secretary of State, again in 1993, promised Boris Yeltsin exactly the same. 1997, this is when the new demand of NATO were accepted, and the Americans knew that this is going to create one day a problem, particularly in Ukraine. So they form a new army. They train this army. They equip this army with Western weapons so they can fight Russia. That is behind the conflict. We are doing a war that we have nothing to do with.
Elijah Magnier, it's always a pleasure, an honor to talk with you. Thanks for coming on the mother of all talk shows,